Welcome to Talent Titans, the podcast where we bring you entrepreneurs and leaders from the global staffing industry. I'm your host, Suky Sodhi. Now let's jump right on in and welcome today's Titan. Hi, welcome to another episode of Talent Titans. Today we have a really interesting guest for you that in many ways has changed her career, pivoted her career 3 times. In many ways, she's not. And I'm talking about Elaine Daniels from Oakdale Consulting. Elaine, welcome.
Well, thank you, Suky. It certainly is a pleasure to be here speaking with you today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about your journey today. But before we dive into that, who is Elaine?
Oh, that's a long story, but let me give it to you real brief. So, started my journey in over 30 years ago, looking for some place where I could land and really feel that I could connect. Ended up happening that didn't happen initially, but I did eventually land a role with a company called Marshall Macklin Monahan. They have now since been acquired by WSP. And they were looking for someone to take the minutes for the meeting of the development of Terminal 3. So I landed in this role. Of course, I could type and I could take shorthand. And that was my journey into engineering and construction. I landed on this project, huge project back in the day, what we're talking in the middle 80s, and launched into the engineering world. Learned about the world of project development, building a project from literally the ground up. Actually, before that, getting the financing to build a project from the ground up. I then stayed in engineering for a very, very long time until eventually the day came that I realized it was time to move on. And when I moved on, I thought, now what? And I thought, well, the only thing I know how to do is recruit. And so I launched Oakdale Consulting based on all the years of experience that I spent in engineering and consulting, working on many projects. Some are signature that we can talk about today, and launched my own business. And now I support that industry because I understand the project literally from when it needs to get financed to the day that it's handed over to the client.
Amazing. And this is a beautiful segue into my very first question. You were trained to deliver engineering products, as you just said, not manage people. Do you remember that moment, that event, whatever it might have been, where you realized that talent problems were in fact more interesting than the technical ones? And how did others respond when you started leaning into the people side versus the engineering product and technical side?
I absolutely remember that day. I was working on a project in Iroquois Falls. I was on a pulp and paper mill. We were doing the rehabilitation for that particular project. So where is Iroquois Falls? It is about 6 hours north of North Bay. So up in the middle of Northern Ontario there. Very isolated. And we were struggling to find talent. So my role was project coordinator. So I was working with a project manager, making sure that all the project pieces were falling in place according to the project schedule. And he came and he said, we're really struggling to find people up here. And I said, yes, who would want to come and work in the middle of nowhere? I got thinking about that as I was heading back to my hotel that night going, projects need people and people want to work on projects. So how do I bring all that together? And it was that very moment that I realized that there was more to the world of which I worked in than delivering projects. I came back to my home office here in Toronto, and I said to the HR manager, I said, I would really like to go and work on the HR side of our business. And she said, why?
Yeah,
you're billable. We can charge you out at a fee. Why would you switch to something that's not billable? And I said, true. But if I bring more people to our workplace, they become more billable. My salary then becomes not significant at all based on that revenue stream. Anyways, she wasn't quite in favor of my decision, but she said, look, if you want to go and help the gentleman in the back office who was our staffing. He was an independent to us, and see if you like it. Well, I absolutely loved it. I loved the people,
Wow.
the projects that they'd worked on, the stories that they could tell. And I built my entire world around not just the people who come to the projects, but the why behind they do what they do, the projects that they've built. And it's those project stories that I now tell candidates. That's what makes you alive to a hiring manager, is the stories that you can share. So do I remember that? Absolutely. I was in a trailer in the middle of nowhere going, wow, there's so much more to this world than what I do. And not that mine was not important,
Yep.
but I could add so much more value because of what I already understood about the world of projects and project delivery.
Amazing. So here's the thing though. People, recruitment, our business is people. And there's no two people the same. Okay. Different circumstances, different experiences, different mindset, all of that stuff. When you came into HR, your engineering mindset, your project based mindset, this happens, we do this, and then almost predictable outcome. Okay. Clashing with the messy world of HR, people, for all the reasons that I just said. Surely at some stage, your logical mind had to have, I don't want to use the word failed, but I can't think of a better word in the moment, where your logical mind is, hang on a second, you want a job, you want X money, okay? Company needs somebody with this skill set, they're willing to pay X money. On paper, that's a perfect match. Why would you not want that job? Or why, on the other side of the equation, hey, Mr. Hiring Manager, why would you not be hiring this person? There had to have been that moment where you're like, what? Because logic was saying one thing, reality saying another.
100%. And there wasn't a day that my logical mind didn't clash with my HR mindset, or the HR mindset, I should say, because people are different, and what they are today might not be what they will be tomorrow, or 3 months from now, or 6 months from now. And so that was really hard for me coming into that. Here's the match. Here's how it works. What's the problem? Why are you struggling to make this hire? Or why is the candidate not crossing the line? And I realized that the engineering mind, or that logical mindset, doesn't actually, it works to a point
Mm-hmm.
within the HR realm. And within the HR realm, I had to learn how to ask questions different ways, the same question a different way. When a candidate was struggling to answer the question, I had to stop and say, oh, maybe I'm thinking about it in too logical a way, and I need to reframe it. So through the years, I learned that if you build your interview questions around storytelling, it put the candidate at ease. They shared a lot more because they were now telling me a story. But then I had to develop listening skills to listen for the answers in that story, because people would just start telling me a story. And then what was it that I was listening for in the story? And that helped the clash between the logical, here's what's going on, versus allowing the candidate to be themselves or come out as a little more of their authentic self. We all know that that's a struggle because people struggle in that space, but it was the same for the hiring managers. I would go and I would say, now, how could I frame this in a story? So we'd have the conversation, more a story rather than here's the facts, but recognize also on the other side that they were or are engineers. So their mindset was also governed in a certain way. So it was a tightrope that I walked all the time of how do I balance this? But what I also learned was in that messy world is get to know your client. So who's your hiring manager? How do they like things? And the more I got to know them, the relationships I built with them, it became easier to bring candidates across that maybe didn't seem like a match or was messy or so it was one thing to know your candidate, but as I grew in my career, I realized that it was equally important to know the style of the manager.
You said a couple of different things that I want to. You said so much there, so
Mhm.
many really great nuggets, but I want to pick a couple up. You said you had to start listening to what the story was actually saying. I'm paraphrasing here.
Mhm.
And then you said you had to, from your logical engineering mind, you had to change how you were asking the questions. I love that because what happens typically, and I know so many people are going to message me and say, you're wrong on this. Most people say the candidate has to change how they're doing X, how they're relaying this story. You went the other way and you said, what do I have to change in the way I am doing this new role? That puts the candidate at ease, puts them quote unquote in their comfort zone to be able to answer the question. And you said that was through storytelling.
Yes, and it was interesting because that was hard for me to get to because I had never gone into this world of storytelling. Didn't even know really. I didn't even understand it. But as I would talk to candidates, and because I tend to be kind of chatty by nature, I realized that that few minutes of conversation with the candidate before the interview starts, the candidate was actually very relaxed. And then as soon as the interview starts, they their whole disposition changed. And I picked up on that, but it took a few rounds of that to realize, oh, that happens more often than not. So when I shifted my position from tell me about a time, tell me the story behind when, and then I would ask my question, tell me a project story behind when you had to do whatever the question was, they came back with, so I was the one that changed. Rather than saying, here's my script of questions,
Yep.
this is what the company says we have to ask. And I did ask, and I asked all those questions. But I went around telling the story. The one that is the hardest question every candidate hates and every recruiter hates is what is your salary expectations?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody hates that
Yep.
question, but we have to ask it. And so I built a story around it. So we all have a lifestyle that we desire to live. What's your lifestyle? Based on your lifestyle, what do you think your compensation
Oh
should
my
be?
God, you and I have very similar way of asking that question.
Right? So I took it, made
Yeah.
it personal to them.
Yeah. It's really interesting because now I deal with sales.
Mhm.
So pretty much all my roles are going to have a variable component, or in fact, they all have a variable component to them. And what I tend to say is something along the lines of, okay, what's that salary you need to keep to get in order to maintain the mortgage, the kids at school, and stop your partner saying, oh my God, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Right. And we'll all do the mental calculation, right?
Yeah.
We'll say our mortgage is X, our grocery. So you can almost see people's mind doing that
Yeah.
calculation
Yeah.
because that's their real minimum.
That's their
And then that
reality.
allows the conversation to go whichever, depending on their response, then the next piece, right? Because we all have our, especially when we're changing careers and jobs, or even going for a promotion and things like that, we all have that number. That's, if we go below that number, kids don't go to daycare or whatever that might be. And that doesn't help an employer because now you've got a stressed out employee over finances.
Mhm.
How did your colleagues react when traditional HR is, you know, tell me a time when X, and you kind of go in there and you're getting the results, as you said, you're asking all the questions, but you're not doing it their way.
Mm.
How did they react to that?
It was interesting because at the time the team was fairly small. There wasn't a whole lot of us in HR at the time. And so, well, there wasn't. It was just myself and the HR manager, maybe a couple of hiring managers. But the answer was, if you can get the answers to the questions we need, we don't really care how you ask the question as long as it's legal.
Amazing.
So I was very fortunate to have worked with people who allowed me to shift and change, but maintain that, ensuring that it was compliant and with the law,
Yeah.
right? That was my backdrop. As long as it was compliant, and hiring managers started to use that approach or some of those words when they would do their assessments. And I have a story to tell, but we'll see where we fit this in. But it was just really amazing to see as they would sit with me and hear me ask the question, and then try to emulate that in their question by trying to use the same words that I had somehow used. And they would fumble their way through for a while, and then eventually they got used to it because it became natural, right?
And it allowed them to get the end result, which is the right employee.
Yes,
And
yes.
it puts, okay, so you went through, so you done the technical side. You then came into talent acquisition, for lack of a better word. You then progressed your career and went into that traditional, quote unquote, HR. So at that stage, your journey's kind of taken two major steps, but three if you look at, because talent acquisition, HR
Yep.
is not the same, regardless of what people think. Yes, it sits under the same umbrella. Okay, but HR is far more complex and does far more than, and again, before somebody screams at me, talent acquisition is important. We're not saying that. But so that's three bumps your career took. Then you're doing HR. Now was that when you had your first true exposure to external staffing agencies partners? When was the first time you heard or leveraged, should I say, staffing agencies, whether it's search firms, temp, contracting, doesn't matter?
So it was actually in my role as talent acquisition,
Okay.
where I said to the hiring manager, I said, look, there's only so much I can do in a day. There's only so many meetings I can sit in a day. And tonight I have to be on a plane to go somewhere to deal with TA issues, talent acquisition issues in another city. There's only so much I can do. We need to go out, and there's only so many ads we can post and get no results. So we need to explore the external recruitment market. Oh, that's going to cost us money. I said, you're absolutely right. It's going to cost us money. But let's look at the cost versus the vacancy being left open and revenue that is lost on the table. So let's do the math, because numbers don't lie. Let's do the math. And you're going to tell me that it's going to take so many months before that becomes, into the revenue stream because of the cost we have to pay for that agency. Okay, so let's all do the math together. And in that whole exercise, we realized that it's not every position that we would send out to
Yep.
an agency, but certainly the ones where they were harder to fill, they were time consuming. By giving those to external agencies, freed up my time to sit and work on some of the strategies, some of the hiring plans. We had big projects we had to deliver. So look ahead, what are the staffing needs we need 6 months down the road, as the project would shift and change. It gave me a time to sit and do that rather than chasing candidates or trying to source them. Let somebody else do that. The time saving and the cost over time far outweighed what we paid the agency fee.
Yeah, 100%. How did you, because this is eventually going to segue us into the present, but as a decision maker, as to which agency, search firm a role's going out to. What were kind of like your top three criterias when you were choosing the partner you were going to work with on a particular role?
That was not always easy because everybody could say, well, I've worked in your space.
Yep.
I know your business. But I would want to believe I was fair in that I would, if people would say to me, well, this is what I did, these are the companies I've worked for, I would give them a chance to work on a role, maybe, or two, and see how they did. And then, and maybe I would pick two or three at the same time working on the same role. I would say to them, look, I've got a couple of firms working on the same role. But the ones who rose to the top were the ones who was responsive, the ones who could say to me, look, that's a tough search. This is what I'm finding. This is what I'm hearing. Those were the ones that rose to the top. And it wasn't so much the firm as it was the person,
Yeah.
right? I never really went by the firm or the brand, but it was the person within that. And what I then found out was that there were certain firms who were really good at doing certain types of roles because they just had that talent pool. There was certain firms who were much better on contract hires or short-term hires versus the longer placement, like the okay. But it was more the person. It was the person who said, who was honest, who was transparent, who said, look, this is where I'm hitting a brick wall. What else can you help me with? Like, so we became more partners in the search rather than a vendor
Yep.
relationship.
So that consultative solutions type of approach rather than transactional. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I mean, that there had to have been a moment, and I'm hoping it's a big moment, but rarely is it a big moment, when that last straw came, right? So you're in corporate and it pushed you to actually go to the other side of the table and start your own staffing firm. What was that? As I said, I'm hoping it's a big, wow, big, juicy story behind it. Probably not. Where you were just like, okay, I'm done. I am. Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic X years. Now I'm going to pivot again without losing your roots, engineering and people. I'm going to go self-employed. What was that moment?
I don't know that it was a moment. I think it was a journey.
Okay.
So when I started really getting into this world of engineering and really getting into the world of staffing, I was working with a smaller firm, so 2,000 employees. It was myself, an HR manager, and a coordinator. And we worked together really well as a team, exceptionally well. We covered each other, we backed each other up. And so I'm trying to think now, back 2013, 2014, somewhere back in there was lots of start of conversations about mergers and acquisitions and what are we going to do and where are we going to go. But everybody said, oh, we'll be all right. We'll stay infrastructure. We'll remain who we are. We will stay our own little bubble. I thought, well, that's good for a couple of years. We all know that story. But anyways, but then 2015, the merger or the acquisition happened. And I was in HR at that time, I had left the world of talent acquisition. So I was in HR and we're into this big company, which was all right. Everything was fine, except that I suddenly realized that all the values of our organization was not the same values, even though it was the same type of business.
Yep.
The things we valued, the conversations we valued, the transparencies we valued were not the same. What they called it, we had not been our lived experience. And so I thought, oh, well, I can do this. I mean, I can manage this. This is okay. I've shifted more than once. I can shift again. I can shift my mindset. It's just a mindset shift here. And I thought, oh, I'm getting older. Do I really want to deal with this major mindset shift that wasn't about a mindset shift? It was about a value shift. This is what I valued. This is the relationships I valued. am I prepared to shift my values to that extent, or shift it even like, anyways? Well, it just so happened my dad got ill or took ill, and I had the opportunity to take an early retirement from the company, very easily done. At this time, I was done. I was done, but I wasn't sure where I was going to go next. And I thought about going on my own, but I just couldn't wrap my brain around all of that. And then I realized, I can leave. I can take early retirement from the company, which simply meant that I carried my benefit package with me. That's
Yep.
really what it meant, and a few other things. But anyways, so I was home for a while, and I kept thinking, you're on your own. You can go and build a business based on your values, based on what you have built and enjoyed in the company that you spent many years working in, 10 years actually, all that you built there, and build it again, but under your own brand, leveraging the skill sets that you had
Wow.
had, the community that you know best, the world you know best. But that didn't happen quickly, nor did it happen overnight. But that was the thought. And this was about, so let me tell you that I was on a plane back from India. I'd gone off traveling to India, like India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. And I was on the plane back on this 13-hour flight going, go and do something for yourself and build it on what was you valued and what you want to share in the relationships you go forward. So it wasn't sort of a big wow moment, but it was that journey of different things that took me to where I am today. Or
It usually is, right? It's usually that little voice, that whisper starts at some stage.
Mhm.
I do want to touch on tech though, because everyone's talking tech, AI, and what have you, and there's so much out there. Now that you've worked both sides of the table, I don't need to name the tech, but I kind of want to know what it done anyhow. That you're just like, oh my God, worst piece of tech that's ever happened to recruiting, be it internal or external. Because there's so much out there and everybody talks about it. And let me help you out here and get thinking on this one. So, outreach technology that does outreach, technology that, I don't know, if you're doing contracts, manages the contractor based technology that is writing CVs for candidates. Is there something out there you're just like, oh my God, I don't see the purpose of this tech in our industry, be it internal or external recruiting?
Very good question. Having, again, being on the internal side, we all had our applicant tracking systems, and we all said, oh, if only it could do this or that
Yep.
for us,
Okay, so
right?
take the question, what was it missing then? Let's,
Well,
if
so
that's
this is
easier.
where I was going to go with this. So we all wanted it to do the outreach,
Hmm.
right? We all wished it had an automatic way of doing outreach. We all realized that these big applicant tracking systems that companies have are are massive. A tiny change costs thousands of dollars to
Yep.
do. So therefore it can't get done. It just isn't possible. So we were all looking for ways to automate certain steps in the process. Because that was the, we were all looking for ways to, how could we better look at a resume and be able to assess whether it matches the job description. So we would come up with different questions and all of that, but it never hit right because, again, it wasn't standard. There was nothing to map it against. So we all struggled with what applicant tracking systems, and don't get me wrong, it had a purpose, but what it became was a big black hole for resumes.
Oh, good point. And I think in many ways, although the technology's moved on and everything like that, in many ways, I think we're still there.
We are, we are, and what I found, so moving on in my career, when I went back to, I'll say I went back to Hatch. They were looking for someone to lead their talent acquisition across North America. And we came up with a list of project improvements for talent acquisition in that role. It was about an 18-month contract. They called me back because of my experience and my understanding of the business to help them frame this role.
Hmm.
And one of the big things that we all realized was that we are sitting, so we bragged about our 35,000 resumes in our database, but nobody had any idea who was there. We talked about building talent pools, and nobody could figure out how to really make it work, that it could be robust. So we all know what to do,
Yep.
and we all have the data to do it based on the resumes in our respective databases. But bringing those resumes forward is a level of effort that a lot of internal teams don't have the lift for.
Oh my God, you've just opened up a can of worms in my mind with that question. As you were working with agency, and beg your pardon, now on the agency side,
Mm-hmm.
something we hear, oh, but that person's known to us because they're in our database. Well, yeah, they're like 10 years old in your database. You have, or you haven't spoken to them for 2 years and stuff like that. So everybody was using that quote unquote the fact that the person's in the database as well, candidate ownership type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I coach ways around that. It all goes in your terms, but generally that's what you hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that you're on the other side of the table, has your opinion on that changed? Just because they're in a database, um, you're not going to pay a fee, or is your opinion now, hang on a second, what was I thinking? Yeah, they were just sitting there gathering dust. They weren't my quote unquote my candidate.
Mm-hmm. So it was interesting because when we we built, so our first big database that we had was Connects Brasserin, right, way back when. And we had all these candidates. We loaded them in, and we were so excited, and we owned all these candidates,
Yeah.
right? And agencies would present us with a candidate, and we'd push back and say, "Oh, but we own this. We have this person," and whatever. Anyways, go to reach out to the person and find out the email address bounces back, or the phone number doesn't work, or all the things we've just talked about, right? They were sitting there in that big black hole. Nobody had connected with them. Anyways, after a few rounds of this, I thought, okay, this is really stupid. I'm just being an idiot. They know I sound like an idiot because I don't have the current resume, and they do.
Yep.
So how do we broker?
And you don't have the
I
relationship
don't have
they
the
do.
relationship. I have nothing. How do we come to a deal, an arrangement that says, okay, you've had the candidate in your database, but you've done nothing. And so we put a timeline on it. It took a while of everybody coming to what is that timeline? What is that date? And for some roles, it was anywhere between 6 months and 12 months. If
Yeah.
we haven't talked to that person or connected or done anything with that person, that resume, not person, resume, in that window of time, then we don't own it. They may sit in our database, but technically we don't own them. We don't own anybody really
Yeah.
in reality,
But
but
I always take that one step further. And I always coach my agency coaching clients when they've got that issue. I say, no, in your terms, the company must have actually had dialogue, not we sent them an email, sent them a text message. That is not communication.
no.
That's administrative, right? So I think anybody listening to this, I highly encourage agencies to put this in their terms, period.
Mm-hmm.
But put that, I think a 6-12 month window is a good window.
Mm-hmm.
But it must have been the outreach there must have been communication.
And we didn't talk, and you're absolutely right, because we said we can just get the system to give me all the candidates dated prior to X and send them an email. Well, that didn't justify
It's
the
not
response
communication.
unless they came back to us and said, I'm still interested. And we had a conversation,
Bingo.
right? And
Yep.
then that changed the picture. So, yes, it shifted from the fight to save the company money mentality to, are we adding value just by saying we have all these people in our database? but we have no idea who we even have there. And
Yeah.
we and don't have and internal recruiters come and go. They don't have the relationship. They don't maintain those relationships. They don't really maintain any relationships unless it's somebody that they've really connected with,
Yep.
because that is not their job. On the internal side, that is not their true job. They have so many other tasks within their day-to-day space that they need to do, that really maintaining those relationships is not their job. It's not part of their core job.
Yeah. Because think about it. On the agency side, our job is to maintain those relationships, build those relationships, keep those passive and active relationships. And we spend a lot of time and money
Mm-hmm.
making sure that happens.
Right.
Now, everybody has their cowboys, I get it, but we spend a lot of time making sure that happens. And I've placed candidates that I've built a relationship with over 2-3 years,
Mm-hmm.
the senior ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there is a value to that. There's a huge value to that. And not only that, there is a huge cost to that.
Mm-hmm.
And what you find is where you have built a true relationship, a lot of candidates, not always, but the ones that have built true relationships, they're going to say to your internal, actually, sorry, I've been speaking to Suki about that role. And how you conduct yourself at that stage, I have literally had, and my clients should know better because they're agencies, right? I've literally had candidates say, no, I'm not going, no, if they're not going to honor that agreement, it speaks volumes about how they think,
Yes. Yes.
right? So
Yes.
it's that saving that 10, 20, $30,000 quote unquote invoice, 10x that with the
Yep.
damage that you've done. So I know we're going to come up on time soon, but I want to ask you, I want to move to the present day, so to speak. You're running your own firm. What did you learn about yourself as a leader that surprised you? Again, maybe something juicy, something uncomfortable. Corporate life hadn't really brought to the surface.
Wow. So, again, long corporate life, long in the world of managing schedules, and but I was managing other people's schedules. I was managing other people's timelines. I was living my life by its quarterly review. So these are the things you need to get done. So I go out on my own. I'm all excited about this idea that I got on a plane coming back from India. And I launch out and it's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I get a license and off I go. And I sign up for an agency workshop of how to build a business. And I go out to get clients and all of that. And then I realize somewhere in that 18-month span of time, by doing all these exciting things and getting a few clients, and I realize I have no idea how to manage myself.
Wow, that's a
I
big
can
one.
manage the tasks and I can manage the what needs to happen in the process and the process of recruitment, but what happens when all these clients are gone? How do I find more clients? Where do I knew where to find them because the course had taught me where to find them, or how to find them, or how to use LinkedIn to find them, and use the strategies of LinkedIn to find them. And because I had never actually built a weekly planner that said, on Mondays you do this, on Tuesdays you do that, Tuesday afternoons you do this, set time aside for BD, set like all of those things, I just stumbled across everything that I was doing. And it is evident in how my business has gone. There were good months and there were really bad months. The inconsistencies of all of that was simply because I did not have a plan.
Wow, that's
And
honest.
and that is honest. Like, so, because it wasn't that I didn't know what to do, but to do it for me. So again, think of corporate, right? You've got the president, the CEO, you've got all the VPs and everybody doing their role in an organization. Well, I'm all of those people now.
Yeah.
And so, how do I? It was carving out the time to be the VP, to think marketing, to be the finance person. Like, it was just carving out little pieces. Unfortunately, that is still my weakest point, is that whole, oh, I got to do invoicing today, right? Oh, I got to, do this, because I just don't roll that way naturally. I tend to do a lot of things on the fly. By recruitment, because I know I can do it. And so, what did I learn? What am I still learning? And still, it's my struggle. It's the hardest mind shift. But now I'm actually good at have it in my calendar. Like, do your invoicing today. Like, it's actually hard in my calendar, just because that to me is, if I'm going to be all of those pieces, and I need to be all of those pieces in order for this business. And now that I'm shifting the service that I offer within the engineering space, from being that full life cycle to being that sourcing partner who helps build those teams, for a fee. So it's not like it's done. I don't get paid on the hire. I get paid.
Yep.
Here's a suite of roles, right? It's shifting. So how do I find the time to do all of those things, and being able to say, and this is how I run my business. This is what I do.
It
That
is because you're so
shift.
used to, even if you just look at a hire, well, somebody has a need, they onboard the role with you, you do your part, and then they can't do their part until you've done your part. So there's this automatic, because as you become the bottleneck, and the last thing you want to be is a bottleneck.
Right.
And it's also what I find when, especially when people start out running their own business, they're never quite sure when to work in the business, when to work on the business,
Yes.
when to do admin, when not to do admin. And that's a really interesting one. I know we're running out of time, but I got a question for you.
Mm.
Now that you have your journey again started in the field, all the way through to now you are sourcing for engineering roles, reflecting on it, client hiring, their strategy. What were some of the mistakes that you see clients of your clients now are potentially making in their hiring strategy? Now that you're sitting on the other side of the table, you're talking to a lot of their competitors. What are some of those mistakes you're seeing?
I think, and again, I don't want to call it out quite for what it is, but what I see is that, so we go through the intake meeting, we ask the questions, and sometimes, not all, some hiring managers don't really understand what their ideal client should look. No, they know what their ideal client should look like. They don't know how to articulate it in an intake meeting or in a job description.
You mean their ideal candidate?
Ideal candidate, sorry,
Okay,
ideal
just
candidate.
clarify that. Yep.
Sorry, ideal candidate, yes. And I find that where it makes it hard is because I have worked in some of those organizations who do that. It's easy to assume you know what they're saying rather than actually asking the questions, because sometimes they really don't know and they will throw. So, what has happened is you give candidates over and it's not the right person or not the right profile. And you think, well, that's what you said, or that's what I heard, or maybe that's what my experience has told me. And so it's that piece of being able to articulate. And maybe for me, it's learning how to ask more questions and not assuming that I know what they're saying because I've been in that space. And
That makes
so,
sense. But sure, your technical knowledge is definitely going to, that's your competitive advantage,
yes,
right?
yes.
But it's really interesting because it's articulating, because their jobs are not, they're not salespeople. They don't know how to tell you the job,
Mm-hmm.
sell you the job. They're just like, well, isn't it obvious? I'm looking for an X and an X does Y, and the right person should know. So it really is. That's a really interesting one, and that happens across all industries.
Right.
That is not just your industry. Now, my final question. All right. You said you've shifted your focus to sourcing. Quickly tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes. So, Sun Life Cycle for a long time. And when I started this idea percolating in my mind, it was, what is the gap or the struggle that every internal team has? What is that gap? And it's not about why they go to external vendors or not, but what is the gap? Because the gap was really building talent pipelines, or a pipeline of talent that would reduce the time to fill. Because that's what everybody wants, right? Is reducing
Yep.
the time to fill. That's the goal, right? And so come back to the internal team, come back to why they reach out to external vendors, is because they do not have the time in their day to do what I can sit and do all day, or your team can do all day, is engage with candidates, build those relationships, spend time understanding why they're interested in making that shift. Internal talent teams do not have, and I know that firsthand. I've got to run off to a meeting. I've got to get these offers out. I've got to get this onboarding. I've got to make sure that something is happening somewhere along the onboarding trail so that candidate can start on a certain day. And that payroll is like all those administrative things that happen. The
Well, that
teams do
goes
not
full
have time to
circle
do that.
Yeah, it goes full circle to what you said earlier about talent acquisition are doing a lot more than just that sourcing view. That is just a part of their job. That's really important because, to your point, you identified a gap. That's thinking like an entrepreneur,
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's thinking like an entrepreneur. So look, this has been fascinating. We could have kept going, but people listening to this, they want to reach out to you. What is the best way for them to connect with you?
So the best way for people to connect with me is via LinkedIn, because it's the most accessible. It's where I do a lot of connections. People can also contact me directly at my email, elaine.daniels@oakdale.ca, and reach out. I love to chat. I love to share my journey. I love to hear other people's experiences. And I think for me, learning from other people, even in this conversation, it just opens up new ideas, new pathways of thinking, things maybe I tripped across and to share that with other people could open up a whole new world for even their thinking on their
100%.
journeys.
Yeah, you're never too experienced, too old to this to learn.
Absolutely not.
Right? And it might not be the solution, but it's that one conversation that triggered something else.
Yes.
You went to India and something triggered on that flight back, or it might even have been before, saying, what are you doing? Why haven't you launched your own? Fantastic. Elaine, thank you ever so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, and Suky, thank you for reaching out. And it's been wonderful, even just to share my journey, a story that I absolutely love to share.
Amazing. And I look forward to maybe in a year or so revisiting and seeing what's changed.
Love to do that. All
Take
right.
care.
Thank
Bye
you.
for
You
now.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of Talent Titans, brought to you by Recruitment Professional Forum, where they're building a grassroots community for professionals and leaders in the recruitment industry to collaborate, advocate, and advance the profession. If you liked or were inspired by what you heard, make sure to follow, subscribe, and even leave a review. It lets more talented recruiters like you find the show. Until next time, keep on being a talent titan.